Okay, I'm going to do another session now on some of the features of our cathedral. And what I'm going to do in this one is our Stations of the Cross. And I'm not going to talk about each one of our stations. There are 14 stations, I think we all know. But I'm going to talk about a few of our stations that I think are highly unique and have some very, very interesting features about them. So let me give you a little quick background on the station generally. The Stations of the Cross, well, as early as the 2nd or 3rd century, we know that Christians were making pilgrimages to Jerusalem and tracing the steps of Christ's final journey on earth. And that became a little difficult around the 12th or 13th century. That was when the Ottoman Empire took over the Middle East. And they didn't prohibit Christians from visiting, but they did prohibit Christians from showing any signs of reverence or adoration at any of those sites. Of course, in Islam, any depiction of any human figure is absolutely forbidden, and any statues or crucifixes would not have been allowed. So it was about that time that people in Europe started building their own Stations of the Cross. Various churches would build some in their yards or their grottos, or put some up in their churches. And for a long time, the stations were pretty much whatever a particular church wanted to make its stations. And they ranged from 7, you go to a church that has 7 stations, to 37. Some had as many as 37. And finally, Pope Clement XII, in 1731, he fixed the number of stations at 14, and that's what we have today. I need to point out that although probably every Catholic church you've ever visited, you can find some form of Stations of the Cross in them. But the Stations of the Cross are not a required part of church architecture, and there actually are churches that don't have the Stations of the Cross in them. I actually know of one in Idaho, and I'm not going to name that church because I don't want to create problems for the pastor of that church, but there is at least one church in Idaho that doesn't have any Stations of the Cross in it. But the Stations of the Cross, as I said, they're now fixed at 14, and they're meant to represent Christ's final journey on earth. And if you look at the 14 stations, there's only 8 of them. Numbers 1, 5, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14 that are actually biblically documented. You can find them in the Bible. You can find some story in the Bible about them. So, our stations are interesting from several aspects. There are several interesting political statements made in these stations, and I'll talk about those. Also, it is very interesting that I know from researching the original records of the building and decorating of our church, Bishop Gorman was the bishop who chose the windows, the statues, the stations. And Bishop Gorman had specified in his contract with a company in New York, a church furnishings company, that he wanted original oil paintings for his stations. And I've been told, I'm not an expert on this, but I've been told that our stations are not original oil paintings. They're lithographed on copper plate, very high quality lithographs, and they were covered with a coat of varnish, and that kind of gives them the look of oil. But again, I've been told, and I'm not an expert, but that these are not oil paintings. And there's a couple of things, we'll look at one station in particular near the end of this presentation that will just kind of add fuel to the fire of the discussion of are they oil paintings or are they lithographs? Because I'll show you something that says, well, this could be either way. Anyway, let's talk about the first station. The first station is Jesus is condemned to death. We're all familiar with this. Pilate's washing his hands. The interesting thing in this station, if you look carefully at this banner or the plaque this page or soldier or whatever is holding, it says SPQR. That was the Latin abbreviation on a lot of the Roman Empire iconography. And that was a Latin phrase. Well, it's the Senate and the people of Rome. SPQR, the Senate and the people of Rome. And that is what I call a very interesting political statement, because that tells us absolutely who passed the sentence of death on Christ. It was not Pontius Pilate, it certainly wasn't the Jews, it was the Senate and the people of Rome. And the Roman Empire was very proud of that statement. The Senate does only what the people want it to do. The other interesting thing in this station is this young man here. He's in purple. He's the man who's, look carefully, he's got an urn. He poured the water over Pilate's hand when Pilate worked. But he's in purple. That tells you he's royalty, or more likely the son of royalty. So he's wearing a very distinctive purple robe, and he has a very distinctive haircut. Looks almost like a 20th century haircut. And we're going to see this young man in a later station and comment on him again. So that's station number 1. And this is the 4th station. We're jumping ahead. As I said, I'm not going to talk about each one of the stations, but just ones that I think are significant. The 4th station is generally known as Jesus meets his mother. And what I like about this station is this figure here. There's obviously Jesus, Mary, but this figure here, that's the patron saint of our cathedral. That's St. John the Evangelist. John was the only one of the 12 apostles who appears in any of the stations. And again, we know that's accurate from the biblical accounts of the confrontation in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Peter and the others ran away, but John followed along. So this is John, and he's not just in this station, I think he's in 3 others, and I'll point them out as we go along. But if you go through all 14 stations, that's the only apostle you'll find in the stations. John the Evangelist, the patron saint of this cathedral. That's the 4th one.
2.
Okay, we're at the 5th station now, and this is the one Simon of Cyrene helps Jesus to carry the cross. And this is one of the stations that is pretty well documented in the Bible. And we're told that Simon was a farmer and he was on his way home from his field. The interesting thing in this station, there's a couple of interesting things. These 2 young men in the background. These are Simon's son. And again, Mark in his gospel actually names them. They're Rufus and Alexander. And they've been helping their father in the field. They're headed home. One's got a spade. One's got a bag of seed or something under his arm. And it's interesting, again, the older one is holding the hand of the younger one. He's being a good older brother. But the fascinating thing is these 2 young men have halos around their head. So they're saints. In somebody's eye, they're saints. And I mean, Simon doesn't have a halo. Simon's doing all the heavy lifting here. But he doesn't get a halo, but the 2 boys do. And so why do the sons have a halo? Well, all we can do is speculate on what was in the mind of the 14th century artist who first depicted this particular scene. And so I'm going to do some speculation, okay? Paul, who wrote the epistles, was a companion of Mark, who wrote the gospel that named these two young men, Rufus and Alexander. And Mark and Paul, years later, actually traveled together on some of their missionary trips. And Paul, at one point, in one of his epistles, asked his followers to treat well my two friends, Rufus and Alexander. Now, those are pretty common names in the 2nd century, but it seems like the artist who was painting this scene was familiar with both Mark's gospel and Paul's epistle, and he speculated that these two young men, because of this moving experience watching their father help the Christ child, that they had grown up to become saints. And as I said, all that is speculation. Final thing we want to take away from this station, Simon's wearing a very distinctive outfit. A red cap, a green cap, a red robe, and green leggings. He's kind of like the Christmas elf or something. And I point that out because we're going to see Simon at several more stations. He's going to come along on this journey. Most of us have been taught, Simon helped carry the cross, got that out of the way and went about his day. But these particular sets of stations suggest that Simon played a much larger role. Okay, I'm going to go down to the 7th station now. Now we're at the 7th station, and the 7th station is Jesus falls the second time. When you look at this station in the future, go back and look at the 1st station, and go forward and look at the 9th station, because Jesus fell 3 times in Catholic tradition. The falls are not biblically chronicled, but in Catholic tradition, Jesus fell 3 times. If you look at the 3rd station where Jesus fell the first time, it's little more than a stumble. He's totally upright, but he's stumbling. At the 2nd station, he's down on all 4s. And at the 9th station, he's prostrate on the ground. And again, this to me is thinking on the part of the artist. He's depicting this man being flogged and beaten and dragged and tortured along and he's stumbling. And this is how he would stumble. He would fall a little bit, he'd stumble a little bit, he'd fall to his knees, and eventually he'd fall flat down to the ground. And again, I think it's a wonderful thought into the image by the artist. And then there's Simon. He's still helping. He's helping take the cross off Jesus here. And here's that young man again. He's got that purple robe. He's got that very distinctive haircut, and he's carrying a sign. And you can see the sign says, what you can see of it, because half of it's behind the pointing soldier, but it says, Nazareum Judaeorum. And again, we're told that Pilate ordered a sign made to read, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And he ordered it made in both Latin, which was the language of Rome, and Hebrew, which was the language of Jerusalem. So this is the Latin characterization, and you can see the last 2 words on the top, on the sign. The 2 words at the end of the sign. Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Nazareum, Rex Judaeorum. Judaeorum is what shows there. We're going to talk about this sign again. And in fact, we're going to go to the very next station, the 8th station, and we're going to look at that sign from a different perspective. We're at the 8th station now. The 8th station is where Jesus meets the women of Jerusalem and tells them not to weep for him, but to weep for themselves and their children. But the interesting thing to me about this station is, here's that sign again. And you can read a little more of it. Jesus, Nazarene, Rex, Judaeorum. Okay? But the really interesting thing about that sign is it's not our young page boy carrying it anymore. It appears to be a young lady. So maybe he just got tired of carrying the sign. He handed it off to one of his friends. I'm going to go ahead here a bit. But it is very interesting to me that the page boy who was in Station 1 and Station 7 is now gone, and there's a young lady carrying the sign. It's supposedly going to be affixed to the cross, and we'll talk about that too a little later. At the 12th station, I'm going to initially not talk about the people and the scene, but I will cover that. But what I'd like to point out here, and it's probably not too visible on the video, but right here and right here, and maybe right there are some blisters forming on our station. Okay, if this was a lithograph, it would not blister. If it's an oil painting, it very likely would blister. But to add a little more confusion to what our station, we're going to have to get some experts from the Boise Art Museum to determine this, but if it's a lithograph, it wouldn't blister. But if it's a lithograph that was varnished, as I've been told, it would blister, or could blister. So there are blisters on this one, and there are blisters on this one, and I do find it interesting that these are the two most southern exposed stations. They probably get more heat than any other station does. And actually somebody needs to, at some point, think about that and what kind of repair or restoration needs to be done, because they're probably not going to get any smaller. But again, this is the station with the patron of our cathedral in it. There's John, it's Jesus, Mary, and John. The sign above Jesus' head. What happened to that sign those two kids carried along the way? It never made it up above the cross. This is the typical representation we see on crucifixes in Catholic churches all over the world. The I-N-R-I. And those, as I said, there are no J's in either the Hebrew or the Latin alphabet. So I's would be substituted there. So these are the first letters of that inscription that Pilate ordered put on it. It would be Jesus Nazareum Rex Judaeum. Okay? That's too long to put on a sign. So although we had a young man carry it from Station 1 to Station 7, and then a young friend of his, that appears to be a young lady, pick it up and carry it the rest, that sign was never used. We have the typical I-N-R-I put up there. We're at the 14th station now. This is the last station. Jesus is laid in the tomb. And I just noticed, or had pointed out to me, this one is blistering too. But what I find interesting about this station, and it's not something I've often seen depicted, but helping to lay Jesus in the tomb is Simon of Cyrene, whom I was always taught, led to believe, understood. Simon was pressed into service by the Roman soldiers, helped Jesus carry the cross. They got to Golgotha. Simon and his two boys went home and had their dinner. But that's not the case in this depiction, because we know it was several hours after Jesus' death that he was laid in the tomb. So Simon of Cyrene, according to this artist anyway, stayed around until the end and helped laid Jesus in the tomb, which is another reason Simon deserves a halo and he doesn't have one. That's it. So this has been a comment on some, what I consider intriguing aspects of some of our Stations of the Cross. And I invite you to look carefully at all of the Stations of the Cross and look carefully at all of the artwork in our church. Because the longer you stand and look at some of these things and the longer you contemplate them, the more certain messages are going to come out. I've just told you about a few messages that kind of struck me as I've studied these things. And I'm sure if you study the station and the artwork, other messages will come up. And as we've indicated earlier, this is one of a series we're doing on the artwork in the church. And I'm going to do the windows next. And I will talk about every one of the windows. I haven't talked about every one of the stations. You need to realize or keep in mind that there's an adage that there's nothing accidental in liturgical art, whether it's the Stations of the Cross, the stained glass windows, statues. There is a message in all liturgical art. And some of the messages are subtle and some are pretty dramatic. I've talked, as I said, about some of the messages that leapt out at me, but I invite you to spend some time looking carefully at some of the artistic depictions in our church and think about what messages may come forward to you. Okay, while doing these things on the station, we had the opportunity to look at the back of the old altar while they're preparing it for the new iteration of the tabernacle. And I noticed this brickwork back here. And from my eye, it's pretty shoddy brickwork, but I was told, and I researched some things, when the altar was originally built, there was this huge marble backdrop that went up and actually covered that center window. And that was the decision was made to take that down when they did the 1979 reconstruction. And a lot of people, when that was taking place, commented on literally this shoddy brickwork back here. In fact, what the documents I read referred to this brick stuffed with straw. And it was just faced with marble. It wasn't a big marble backdrop. It was just some bricks. And I'm not a bricklayer, but that doesn't look like good workmanship to me. So maybe they did us a favor by taking that down, because we've had some pretty serious earthquakes here of late. And that could have come over. I don't know. But